Clara hadn't intended to stop. The highway had stretched endlessly behind her, ribboning through bleak fields and nameless hills. The kind of scenery that lulled a person into a trance. But then came the fog, thick, sudden, curling in from the forest like a memory. It cloaked the road ahead until even her high beams dissolved into milky nothing. A rusted sign, nearly hidden in the mist, beckoned her toward a dirt path with faded lettering. Pine Hollow, historical trailhead. She pulled over. She told herself it would be brief, just to stretch her legs, maybe take a few pictures. She was, after all, a documentarian by trade, always chasing the lost and the forgotten. That was her reason, or so she told herself. Yet something in her chest felt drawn, as if a tether long buried had been yanked taut. The forest beyond the sign was ancient, the trees impossibly tall, their trunks gnarled with time. She stepped into the trail without a second thought. The path narrowed quickly, swallowed by the overgrowth. Ferns brushed against her legs, damp and cool. Every few steps, she found remnants of the past. A broken horseshoe, half buried in dirt. A child's toy long surrendered to moss. A decayed signpost pointing to places that no longer existed. The silence was total, save for her own breath and the subtle whisper of wind. Yet beneath it all, she felt watched. Not with malice, but a kind of waiting anticipation. She had read of Pine Hollow years ago in an old field guide. A settlement that thrived briefly during a gold rush, then vanished without explanation. No fire, no flood. Simply a town swallowed whole by silence. Corey had filed it away with dozens of other places she intended to visit. And now, by chance or fate, she found herself here. She pulled out her camera and took a photo of the trailhead. The lens fogged immediately, but she didn't notice until much later. She followed the trail for what felt like hours, though her watch betrayed no more than 30 minutes. Time stretched in unnatural ways within the mist. The sun was gone, or perhaps merely hidden, and the sky had turned a uniform grey. She came across the first cabin then, rotted, leaning precariously, half swallowed by ivy and lichen. A porch still remained, its boards creaking under her weight. Inside, the air was stale with memories and something else. A waiting hush. The furniture had been left in place. A table set for two, plates still bearing the outlines of long-gone meals. A cradle rocked gently in the corner, though Cowrie saw no breeze. Dust coated everything, yet there were no cobwebs, as if spiders feared the place. On the wall, a family portrait stared out. The faces faded, but the eyes oddly vivid. She took a step closer. The figures were indistinct, yet somehow familiar. She couldn't place them, but her stomach knotted with unease. She left the cabin, but couldn't shake the sensation it had left on her skin. A cold film, like old breath. She continued on the trail, which now wound tightly between trees, whose branches grew too low, forcing her to duck. The mist thickened with each step. Somewhere to her left, something rustled. Not an animal, she was certain. The sound was too deliberate. She turned quickly, heart hammering, but there was nothing. Just trees and the weight of silence. A mile or so further, though it was impossible to be sure, she found what had once been a communal hall. Its roof had caved in, but the foundation still stood firm. Strewn across the mossy floor were fragments of journals, pages half-soaked and curling. Cowrie knelt and picked one up. The ink had bled, but she could make out a few words. The trees whisper at night. We see them in dreams. Another page read, if we leave the path, We vanish, one by one. Kaori shivered. The temperature had dropped noticeably. She gathered what pages she could, tucking them carefully into her bag. As she stood, something caught her eye. A symbol carved into the wood of a support beam. It was intricate, spiraling inward like a maze. Beneath it, in red chalk, someone had scrawled, "The forest remembers." A wind moved through the hollow space, and for the first time, Kaori heard something in it. Faint laughter, echoing. She wanted to turn back. The rational part of her screamed for it, but the deeper, buried part, the one that had guided her through forgotten mines, derelict prisons, and ghost towns, urged her on. She pressed deeper into the woods, stepping off the main trail. The moment she did, the atmosphere shifted. The trees grew closer. The mist swallowed her up to her shoulders, and behind her, the path she had come from was gone, replaced by an endless wall of trees. Panic surged in Kaori's chest for only a moment before she smothered it. She'd been in worse situations, or so she tried to convince herself. But this was different. The forest didn't just obscure direction, it erased it. She marked a tree with a small notch from her pocket knife and walked on. 10 minutes later, she passed the same tree again. Same notch, same faint scent of smoke that hadn't been there the first time. Something had bent space itself, or perhaps just her mind. Kaori sat down on a fallen log, trying to get her bearings. She fumbled through her bag, pulling out her field recorder. Her voice was steady despite the rising dread. April 11th. Fog dense. Encountered signs of habitation but no people. Repeating landmarks. Possible spatial anomaly or hallucination. Continuing further in hopes of orientation. She clicked it off and listened. But not just to the silence. Somewhere in the trees, someone was whispering her name. She stood slowly, her eyes scanning the underbrush. The voice, female, distant, repeated her name in a pleading tone, soft and barely above the rustling of leaves. Kaori's hands trembled. She wasn't sure when she'd drawn the voice recorder again, but she hit record anyway. The sound didn't capture on playback, only static. It confirmed her worst fear. What she was hearing, what she was feeling, wasn't always tied to the physical world. Something old was here, and it had taken notice. As she moved forward again, she came upon another structure. This one more intact than the others. A hunting lodge, perhaps. Heavy wooden doors stood partially ajar, revealing an interior coated in grime, but untouched by scavengers or wildlife. A lantern still hung from a ceiling beam, swaying gently as though someone had just passed beneath it. On the far wall, another symbol, not carved, but painted in dark, drying sap. This one looked like an eye split down the center. Kaori found a journal beneath the hearthstone, wrapped in oilcloth and brittle with age. The handwriting inside was jagged, frantic. Don't listen to the voices. They belong to what lives beneath the roots. It watches through their eyes. The trail leads only deeper. We are not the first, and we will not be the last. The forest takes who it needs. The final pages dissolved into illegible scratches, like someone had written them while shaking uncontrollably or screaming. She stayed in the lodge that night, if only because the fog outside had grown so thick it pressed against the windows like foam. In her dreams, Kaori wandered an endless corridor of trees that bled into walls. Faces looked out from the bark, their mouths sewn shut with twine. A child's voice sang a lullaby she almost remembered from childhood. When she woke, her feet were dirty with soil, and the lodge door stood open. The mist was heavier now, clinging to her skin like regret. In the clearing outside, she found footprints, small, barefoot, leading away from the door. Not hers. They circled the lodge twice before vanishing into the trees. Kaori followed, unable to resist. The forest was different now. Not darker, exactly, but older. The trees groaned when the wind shifted, as if resenting her presence. She began to see figures in the mist. Not clear, not real, but impressions. A man hanging from a tree, a woman digging furiously in the soil, a child pointing wordlessly. She tried speaking to them, but they never responded, only stared. Their eyes were hollow but not empty, filled instead with some emotion she couldn't name. Resignation maybe, or warning. Kaori pressed forward, but the air had changed. The very oxygen seemed thinner. It felt like being underwater. Every breath was an effort. Every step an echo of a step she'd taken before. The forest wasn't a place. It was a loop, and she was caught in its orbit, just as others had been. The next sign of human presence she found was a campsite. Modern, only weeks old. A torn tent, scattered gear, and a single boot half buried in mud. A metal tin held more journal pages, some scrawled in red ink. We thought we could map it. We were wrong. The forest doesn't like being understood. The more you see, the less you know. Terry vanished first. Then May. I still hear them. Not them, maybe. But they sound close enough. There was no signature, only a drawing of a spiral. The spiral appeared again on a tree nearby, etched so deeply the bark bled sap like tears. Kaori touched it and recoiled. The wood pulsed beneath her fingers like a heartbeat. She backed away, stumbling, breath ragged. Then the trees shifted, not visibly, but spatially. What had been a clearing closed in with impossible speed. The path she'd followed was gone again, replaced with thorny underbrush and gnarled trunks that hadn't been there moments before. She wasn't just being watched now, she was being herded. Kaori's pulse quickened as she forced herself through the new maze of trees. Her boots caught on roots that hadn't existed before. The woods were alive in a way she'd never experienced, not in the metaphorical sense of teeming with life, but truly sentient. She felt its gaze pressing on her like a second atmosphere. She tried to whisper reassurances to herself, but even her voice sounded wrong, like it didn't belong to her, like it was being echoed by something just behind her. She came upon a grove where the trees bent inward, their branches twisted together in an unnatural arch. Beneath it lay a circle of stones, and in its center, a makeshift shrine. Rusted trinkets, faded photos, and broken compasses had been placed with strange reverence. Some items looked decades old, others much newer. She knelt to inspect one, and saw a name she recognized. Emily Corrin, a fellow researcher who'd vanished 2 years ago while filming in this region. Her compass lay in the dirt. Kaori recoiled as realization settled like frost on her skin. These weren't just offerings. They were remnants. The forest wasn't merely collecting stories. It was claiming people. She didn't believe in curses. Not really, but something was binding all of this. She pulled out her field recorder and spoke carefully. This forest is more than haunted. It has intention. I don't know if anyone will hear this, but if you do, don't follow the trail. Don't answer the voices. Leave. Further down the unseen trail, Kaori found another structure. A chapel, or what was left of one. Its bell had fallen and split the wooden floor in two. Vines grew up through the cracks like veins. The altar was gone, replaced by a stone slab etched with dozens of those spirals. In one corner, a music box played, faint, broken notes looping a lullaby out of tune. Clara didn't approach it. The sound pulled at something deep in her memory. But she knew better than to follow now. Outside the chapel, the fog parted slightly, revealing a figure standing in the distance, not moving, pale, dressed in the clothing of another era. Clara didn't breathe. The figure tilted its head, bird-like, and pointed to the ground beside it. Slowly, Clara stepped closer, one hand on her camera. As she neared, the figure dissolved into mist. But where it had stood, the earth had been dug up. Inside the shallow pit, a rusted key and a roll of film labeled Kari, 1991, the year she was born. The air thickened with emotion. Not fear exactly, but sorrow so intense it stole her strength. She fell to her knees, clutching the key, the film trembling in her fingers. She hadn't told anyone she was coming here. How had it known her name, her birth year? She opened the film canister. Empty. Just a hollow cylinder of metal and memory. The fog around her whispered again, voices overlapping like a broken chorus. Some cried, some laughed, others simply repeated, "You were always meant to return." Night returned without warning, though her watch said it was still early afternoon. The moon hung low, enormous and yellowed like a dying eye. Shadows stretched too far, curling unnaturally around objects. She built a small fire near the chapel and huddled beside it. The flames gave little comfort. Her thoughts spiraled. Why had she really stopped at that sign? Why had she felt pulled, as if called home? Could the forest reach into memories and twist them into lures? She found herself flipping through the old journal pages again, desperate for context. One entry stood out now in its clarity. It doesn't trap you. It invites you to forget who you were, until you're nothing but shadow in the trees. Kaori's breath hitched. She remembered her mother telling stories of a distant cousin who vanished during a hiking trip. No one had ever found her. Now she wondered, was that cousin the woman digging in the soil she saw earlier? The pieces didn't just connect. They bled together. She fell asleep near the fire, journal on her chest. In her dreams, she wandered the same path, again and again. This time, she met others. Shadow figures with faces she almost recognized. Some reached for her, not with malice, but with longing. One whispered, "You're the last." Kaori woke with tears on her cheeks, and the fire reduced to ash. Footprints circled her camp again, and in the dirt, someone had written, "Stay. We're almost complete." Kaori knew now this wasn't an expedition. It was a summons, a rite. The others who had entered the forest weren't simply lost. They'd been collected, gathered. She was a final piece to something ancient and patient. Her mind battled between logic and the overwhelming weight of the unseen. Her voice shook as she recorded again. "They want completion. I don't know what that means, but I think once they have us all, the forest becomes something more. Or less. Maybe it disappears entirely, or spreads." Morning never came. Only a dull, grey dimness that passed for daylight in the forest's dreamlike cycle. Kaori walked without knowing where she was going, her body on autopilot, her mind unraveling in slow, deliberate threads. The forest was no longer trying to hide its nature. Trees shifted positions when she looked away. Paths led her in circles with perfect, maddening precision. And the voices, always the voices, now spoke in unison, a harmony of the hopeless, singing her inward. She found a mirror in the woods, not a natural thing. It stood propped against a stone, framed in rotting wood, its surface aged and rippling. At first, she saw only the forest in its reflection. Then her own image flickered into view, but it wasn't her. The woman in the glass looked older, worn, her eyes hollow and her mouth moving silently. Kaori stepped closer. The woman pressed her hand to the glass. Kaori hesitated, then mirrored the gesture, and felt cold fingertips on the other side. She stumbled back, heart slamming in her chest. The mirror fell, cracking on the forest floor. A low moan rolled through the trees like thunder. Something had noticed. Something didn't like her defiance. The forest around her pulsed. Not visually, but in a deeper way, like pressure inside her skull. She ran, not knowing where her legs were taking her, only that she had to escape the thing growing behind the trees. Her breath tore from her lungs in panicked gasps. Eventually, she collapsed in a wide glade, lit by an otherworldly glow. Silver pale blue like light seen underwater. In the center stood a stone arch, half buried in earth. Symbols covered its surface. Spirals, eyes, and words. In languages she didn't know, but somehow understood. Threshold, cycle, home. Her head throbbed with sudden blistering memories. Not her own, but dozens of others. Men, women, children, explorers, villagers, wanderers, all drawn here, all ending here. Kaori approached the arch. It hummed softly, resonating with her heartbeat. A part of her, the one that still clung to reason, begged her to turn away. But she couldn't. The closer she got, the more it felt like gravity. Like the center of the forest's mind, a stone basin sat at its base, half filled with water that shimmered unnaturally. She looked into it and saw her own face, then hundreds of others layered behind it, all looking through her, all waiting. A final journal page lay beside the basin. The handwriting was hers. She hadn't written it, not yet. But she recognized it anyway. It read, "We were never lost. We were chosen. The trail was never about finding. It was about becoming. The forest doesn't hunger. It collects." The implications rooted deep in her chest. Kaori wasn't a victim. She was part of a pattern, a legacy, a continuation of something far older than names or time or the world outside these trees. She could leave. She felt it. Just for a moment, the forest hesitated, a breath held in its ancient lungs. She stepped back from the arch. The wind died. The whispers stopped. It was as if the forest itself was waiting for her decision. Not forcing, not tricking, but offering. Stay and understand, or leave and forget. She thought of the photos in her bag, the journals, the voices, the woman in the mirror. Her whole life had been circling this moment. With trembling hands, Kaori turned on the recorder one last time. "I know what this place is now. And I think someone needs to remain, to hold the memory, to keep the silence from closing in. If I leave, the trail might disappear. If I stay, maybe someone else finds their way. Maybe they'll hear this. Maybe they won't. But I'll be here, listening." She set the recorder beside the basin. Then she stepped through the arch. Nothing exploded. No great light filled the sky. The forest simply sighed, as if relieved. The mist lifted slightly. Birds returned. Just a few, their calls tentative. The trees, once leaning inward, stood straighter now. And the trail, long buried under moss and secrecy, revealed itself once again. Fresh footsteps marked its beginning, leading back toward the road. And far behind, in the clearing, the recorder played Kari's voice into the wind until the batteries died. Weeks later, a local ranger found the trail again after a storm cleared fallen branches. He reported seeing strange markings and hearing voices he couldn't explain. He took a photo of a broken recorder lying in the grass beside a stone basin. No one believed him, not really. But a month after that, a young woman traveling through the area stopped to stretch her legs. She saw the sign, faded, weathered, and felt something pull at her chest. She followed the path into the fog, just for a moment,